Welcome to our next session on the theology of a movement. I hope you enjoyed the last session, and especially the exercise of looking at the Apostle Paul's gospel messages to the Jews and the Gentiles. I hope that you saw the distinction between the two and how Paul was able to relate the gospel message in a unique way to each audience, really appealing to some of the cultural particularities of each. And I hope that that will be something that will encourage you as you think about engaging your community with the gospel. It's so important that we think in terms of how the gospel can connect with where people are, and asking that question of how is the gospel good news to this people? Because as you and I know, it is most definitely good news. And so I hope that you'll be encouraged to think more about that. In this session, we're going to dive into the theology of a movement. This is a huge subject, and there are many ways or many directions that we might go. What we're not going to do is spend time talking about the different systems of theology, the systematic theology or biblical theology and historical theology. We'll do those in another class, and certainly there is merit in having those conversations. But what we want to do in this session is look at and ask the question, what kind of theology does it take to see a movement continue? Because that's what this is about. We want to see God's movement continue where we are and around the world. And there is most certainly a theology behind that kind of a movement. And I believe the New Testament shows us what that theology is. And we'll look specifically at Paul's letter to the church in Ephesus, actually the circular letter that went to many churches. But for now, let me just take a step back and lay a little bit of groundwork for why this is so important. You know, theology, in a very real sense, is the study of God. I mean, that's the literal meaning of the word, the study of God. And when we talk about the theology of a movement, we're talking about the way in which a movement will mature over time. And there are typically two ways that movements will mature. Either they'll mature in a multiplicative way, where they will continue and expand and multiply, and that multiplication eventually will become exponential, to where we see really a unique looking graph of growth that has a J curve to it. Or a movement could institutionalize, and it could then become flat, where the movement is just simply adding people instead of multiplying people to the cause, so to speak. In some cases, movements will decline as well, or in other cases, they'll just simply disappear altogether. And there are certainly examples of where movements have disappeared completely. And so for maturation, what we want to stress is a theology that will ensure that a movement will continue to multiply and experience exponential growth. Now, the danger of saying something like this is that we can become somewhat formulaic. And that's not what this is about. We don't want to be formulaic. I don't think that there's a 1 + 1 = 2 kind of formula that we might be able to infuse in a movement that will ensure exponential growth. Movements are certainly the work of the Holy Spirit, but it's the work of the Holy Spirit through us that will help to ensure the ongoing growth of that movement and maturity of that movement. And so as we think about a movement theology or a theology of a movement, we might be able to first talk about different principles. And one of those principles is this, that for a movement to continue to grow, it needs to be equipped to the vision and the mission. What I mean by that is this, that God desires people to come to Christ. But more than that, God desires for His name to be declared and glorified. And so the vision of a movement is always going to be focusing on the declaration of God's glory to the nations, so that more and more people will come and worship Him. And the way in which we will be able to see that happen is if we deliberately equip the movement to that vision and to that mission. And so what that means is that we want to see movements mature. And in that way, as they're maturing, they're going to guard against institutionalization. You might recall in our previous session that we talked about the difference between movements and institutions. And so we want to be sure that as the movement is growing and as we are equipping people in the movement to the vision of the declaration of God's glory to the nations, that it will continue to grow and will not institutionalize. A movement, as it is being equipped to this vision, will also be a movement of integrity. It's not going to be divided on its purpose or on its vision or mission. It's going to be united according to those, because it sees that it is a singular vision, of a singular mission of the declaration of God's glory to the nations. When we equip to the vision and the mission of a theology of movement, it will give ownership to people. We emphasize over and over again through our master classes this idea of doing theology in community. And let me just pause here for a moment and say that if you haven't taken advantage of participating in the discussion forums or in the Facebook group or through our live chats on Zoom, I encourage you to do that, because theology is best done in community. And if we're going to arrive at a theology of a movement that is focusing on equipping the saints for the vision of declaring God's glory to all the nations, then we need to be able to do this in community together. That gives a sense of ownership, that this isn't just any willy-nilly theology, but this is a theology that unites us as movement thinkers and as movement leaders. It also, as we do theology in community, at some level dignifies us because we're doing this together. There's not one super theologian that is dictating or mandating a theological system, but it's a community working together to equip the saints to the vision of God's movement. And finally, we want to equip to the vision and mission, and as we do this, we are thinking in terms of unique solutions approaches to engaging our culture, and unique solutions approaches to our particular theology. And what I mean by that is that we want to see a theology of a movement that is culturally relevant. You know, for so long in the history of Western missions, theologies have been imposed on people. And so by doing theology, and equipping people in this theology of a movement, we want to ensure that we're embracing a cultural relevance, not borrowing from other theological systems, but seeing these systems grow up uniquely in a particular context so that it becomes the theology of that place. And of course, this unique solutions approach will also provide indigenous answers to theological issues. There are so many theological issues that arise in the context of a ministry, no matter where it is in the world. And so we want to be sure that a theology of movement will specifically be able to address the unique issues that a particular culture is dealing with. So then, What's the foundation of this theology of a movement? Well, I want to focus our attention just on one chapter in the letter of Ephesians for now, and then we'll look at the entire book and try to put it in the context of a theology of movement. Because what we want, again, to achieve here is to see a theology develop that will ensure the ongoing growth of a movement, the ongoing maturation of a movement. And so I think the letter to the Ephesians is a wonderful place for us to start to build this theology of movements.